According to Ballotpedia, the first ballot initiative in Oklahoma was put forth in 1908, and the first state question to win voter approval occurred 2 years later, establishing Oklahoma City as the permanent home of the state capital. There have been hundreds more since then, but will there be hundreds more in the future? That's the topic of this week's in-depth discussion with moderator Susan Godot and her panel of guests.
Yes, thank you, Rich. That measure likely will not succeed through the legislature this session, but this is an initiative. The initiative petition process is something that comes up frequently for the past several years, and Oklahoma will likely see it again. So we have some experts here who've been following this and are intimately familiar with the process of citizens working within the governmental process. I'd like to introduce them to you now. First, we have Trevor Brown, who is a reporter for Oklahoma Watch. We have Andy Moore, who is the director of People, Not Politicians. And finally, we have Kelly Hall, who is the executive director of the Fairness Project, and she joins us from out in Oakland, California. Thanks to all of you for joining us. All right, Trevor, I want to start with you. Let's lay a quick foundation for everyone here. Explain the process of getting a state question on the ballot.
Sure, yeah. Oklahoma is one of 28 states that have this initiative or referendum process, but it's a hurdle to get on the ballot. If you're doing a statutory change, you need about 100,000 signatures. If you need a constitutional change, it's almost double that. And all that needs to be done in a 90-day period. And that's outside of also surviving legal challenges and other bureaucratic kind of steps that petitioners have to take.
And what's the last state question on the ballot that folks might remember?
Yeah, so the big ones in recent years was medical marijuana, Medicaid expansion, and criminal justice. Those were, three big topics that, voters wanted the legislature to address. They didn't, so voters did it themselves.
Okay. Andy, before I go to Kelly, I do want to talk to you about the issue has come up between the urban and rural divide. And I understand under the proposed petition change, it would require signatures from all 77 counties. Is that true? And if so, is that viable?
Yeah, so one of the proposals would have changed how signatures are collected. And the important thing to remember is that regardless of where those signatures come from, once the measure is on the ballot, every Oklahoman gets a voice, right? Every vote counts. Whether you live in an urban area or in a rural county, we hold the same principle of one person, one vote. And because it is so difficult to get on the ballot already, Oklahoma, as Trevor said, has one of the most stringent processes to get there. It's really unnecessary to change that and how signatures are collected. We think that Oklahomans deserve the chance to vote on measures once they do get on the ballot.
All right, Kelly Hall, you're with the Fairness Project. First of all, tell me what that's about and what your thoughts are if you've listened to what's going on in Oklahoma right now.
Sure. So the Fairness Project is a national nonprofit that focuses on ballot measures and really supports local organizations who are trying to bring these citizen-initiated measures forward. So we're paying very close attention to not only what's happening in Oklahoma, but these same proposals are being introduced and in some cases passed in other states that have less stringent requirements already on the books than Oklahoma. And I would say, picking up on what Andy just said about the proposal to collect signatures from all 77 counties in Oklahoma, to do that in a 90-day period renders the process almost impossible to use, particularly challenging for regular everyday voters who are wanting to engage in their democracy. It would really limit participating in the initiative process to corporate interest, really well-financed interests that can pay to have people out on the street corners in all 77 counties. That really limits who can participate in the democracy, and I think is an unwise direction for Oklahoma to go if they want voters to be able to be the ones who lead on these issues.
What kind of was the impetus for this look by lawmakers of really tightening the reins on state questions, voter-initiated state questions?
Yeah, so it depends on who you ask. I mean, the senators and representatives that were pushing this, they've mentioned that their constituents, weren't always the most informed about what's on the ballots. They said these steps would, help get the word out before people go to the, actually the polling place. If you talk to some other advocates, maybe some people on this call, they would say this is more of a direct, almost retribution for, not retribution, but a direct response to passing some measures that the legislature didn't really want passed, namely Medicaid expansion, medical marijuana, that type of thing. But as we've seen, this is happening across the country. Lawmakers like to have power to themselves a lot of times. When they, give up some of the power to the people, that's power that they otherwise would have. So, it's not really a Republican Democrat issue so much as an issue about control and who has the power. Is it the legislators or is it direct democracy from the voters?
Andy, do you agree with that? Is this a power grab from the constituents, the citizenry of Oklahoma?
It's not a power grab. In the Oklahoma Constitution, the very first power that is enumerated is the power of the petition that's given to the people, right? This has been with our state since statehood. It is listed first on purpose. That's not by accident, is that the founders of our state and the framers of our state constitution knew that there might be a time when our state government is out of sync with what voters want. And if we are stuck and unable to pass the laws that we want, well, that's not much of a democracy. And so they enabled this direct democracy right from the get-go, which I think is, little do they know here, 120 years later, that we would be struggling with this very thing, that we see a legislature that is often either unable or unwilling to pass the laws that the people clearly want, right? Because as a last resort, the people go to the ballot and they do pass it. Even bills like Medicaid expansion, which were contentious 10 years ago, were passed by both chambers of the state legislature and then vetoed at the last minute by the governor. And at that point is when we came back and passed it at the ballot. And I think that these issues they're not pet projects or insignificant. Medicaid expansion, medical marijuana, criminal justice reform. These are big, important issues that speak to the hearts of thousands of Oklahomans. And I am very thankful that we have the right of the initiative petition. And I would caution any legislator who thinks that they know better than the constituents in their district and that they should reserve that power for themselves. I think that is the antithesis of what a representative democracy is supposed to be about. Looking back through state history, only about 28% of all the initiative petitions that have ever been proposed ended up on the ballot. And if we're looking at measures that would restrict and make it harder to actually pass at the end, it is clearly an effort to all but eliminate the initiative petition process or to make it such that it's ineffective and unpractical. And again, I think this is an effort by a legislature who is frustrated by their own inertia or hamstrung by their partisan politics. And it is important that we protect the initiative petition process for the people of Oklahoma.
Okay, so we have 1, signatures from all 77 counties. We have 2, a higher voting threshold for the measure to pass. And now a third one, some reforms call for financial impact to be on a state question. I don't know about many grassroots efforts that could hire a firm to take a look at the financial impact on Oklahoma. Kelly, what say you? I mean, that's 3.
Yeah, I think that instead of focusing on any one of these, we have to take them together and look at their overall intention, which I think Trevor just made the exact right point, which is that this is a whole lot of different approaches to trying to essentially declaw or defang the initiative process in its entirety. This is death by 1,000 cuts for the ballot measure process, making it harder to qualify by collecting signatures, making it impossible to get through the bureaucratic steps, making it harder to win on election day. All of these things add up to simply making the initiative process invalidated without explicitly telling voters that that's what you're doing as a legislature. So it seems like, almost a cowardly approach to wanting to undo the ballot measure process for all intents and purposes, and instead going at it bite by bite, bit by bit. And I'll make one last point, which is that some other deeply conservative states politically have tried this and their courts have overturned them. Just last year in Idaho, the legislature passed a very similar proposal to require signatures from all 35 state legislative districts. And the state Supreme Court, which is, not a set of progressive individuals, said, we see what you're doing here. The Idaho state constitution protects the right to citizen initiative and constitutional amendments, and this is going to invalidate that right just through bureaucracy. And I think that is the same thing that's happening in Oklahoma. And legislators should remember very clearly what Andy has said here, that this is the first right listed for citizens of Oklahoma in the Constitution. And there are limits on how much you can attack that before there are real repercussions.
So, Kelly, I think you mentioned earlier, but I want to get back to how does Oklahoma compare the way things stand now in our state with other states who allow initiative questions on the ballot?
Right now, Oklahoma, within the states that allow these citizen initiative petitions, is the most challenging, or right up there in the top few of how much effort it takes to get an initiative petition on the ballot. That 90-day window that petitioners have to collect signatures is unique to Oklahoma. You're the only state in the country that has that very, very narrow window, which makes it already nearly impossible for folks to collect the tens, hundreds of thousands of signatures that they need to bring this forward. And so the idea that Oklahoma, of all states, is considering further restrictions is just, it's just piling on at a certain point to really the point of impossibility of using the process.
Trevor, do we see more state questions from the legislature or from voters?
The vast majority has come from the legislature, and that's because it's a lot easier for them to do it. All they need to do is just pass a resolution with a simple majority. In the past decade, there's been 25 questions that have made the ballot. Only 7 of those have came from citizen-led groups.
Andy, I'm going to give you the last word on this. Why is it important that citizens have the right to put state questions on a ballot?
Yeah, I think that question is super important, and it really speaks to like the heart of the philosophy of democracy, right? What is a democracy and why do we have it? America has been a model for other countries for hundreds of years, and Oklahoma in particular, even since statehood, has been a model for how the people should and can wield their civic power at the ballot to ensure that our state is shaped by laws that the people support and the people want. And it's important that the Oklahoma voters are allowed and entitled to continue that right, because otherwise we're at the mercy of partisan, gridlock in the state legislature and politicians who might put their own desires for reelection or their own, backroom deals ahead of what's best for the state. And so for the attacks that we've seen proposed against the initiative petition the last few years, to me is an attack on our democracy itself. Legislators should be excited and thrilled that the people of Oklahoma can show the initiative to use the initiative petition process and advocate for the laws that they want to see themselves.
All right, that's our time. I'd like to thank all 3 of you for sharing your knowledge and your insights with us on this important topic. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.